Hi, this is Michael Sean with a heads up for the real country music lovers. Have you heard about Boss Country Radio? When you're not listening to our podcast, you may want to get your country music fix on the latest and greatest global country music network. Heard worldwide on broadcast stations and internet streaming alike. From Hank to Blake to George Strait. Real boss DJs like the old days. And a whole lot of real country you can count on. There's even a rumor that yours truly, old Michael Sean, has been offered a gig. Maybe y'all ought to check it out. Go to freerangetexan.net and click on the Boss Country Radio banner. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Enjoy.
The Free Range Texan Podcast.
Real worldwide transmission with a real Free Range Texan. Campfire.
The Free Range Texan Podcast. Free.
With your host, Michael Sean.
Hola, Free Range Texans, wherever you are. Friends, when we began the Free Range Texan podcast back in October of 2018, we were told by a number of well-meaning folks that the wide and varied content of our podcast would never find a niche. To which we responded, it's a wide and varied world we're here to occupy. So I smile when I read the top line of my show notes. Welcome to episode 40 of the Free Range Texan podcast. And with that in mind, Bill Lee was first to appear on our podcast in episode 20. Bill is one of our nation's most sought-after researchers about Sasquatch. He's a lifetime veteran broadcaster and is widely known for his 3-year podcast series, In Search of Bigfoot. In planning to have Bill back this time, we have asked for and been granted permission to extend our episode 40 to nearly an hour long. But here's what I would have you know. I have known Bill Lee since he was a kid. His dad and I were genuine friends. Bill is real. Not just someone trying to sell you a book. You may not be a believer, and you may believe that Bill is somehow deceived. But we would like to suggest that for the next hour, you just listen. Oh yes, and additionally, at the end of our program, Michael Sean's Campfire will feature a very special guest. This edition is a bit of a mind spinner. So let's saddle up and get ready to ride. Have digital microphone will travel. Oh, hi. This is Michael Sean. Turn the horses out. Let the dog in. Mute the phone. Check your email later. It'll be there. Pour another cup of cowboy coffee. You're listening to the Free Range Texan Podcast. And now, once again, it's time for another Free Range Texan Unexplained File. On our Free Range Texan Unexplained Files, our special, very special guest is Bill Lee. And welcome back to the Free Range Texan Podcast, Bill.
Great to be back. I tell you what, it's always a thrill. And, we go back in radio and some of our friends, and every time we get together, it is just an added treat for me, and it's a pleasure to be on. I'm very humbled. Thank you.
We go back a little further than we actually like to talk about, but yeah.
The 70s.
There. Hey, Bill, you are, as we have mentioned to our listeners, one of the nation's foremost, best interviews about the whole Bigfoot phenomenon. I think I asked you one time, do you prefer Sasquatch or Bigfoot? And you had an answer to that. But would you repeat that right off the bat, what you told me about that?
I prefer Sasquatch, but I had a lady who actually told me one time that word bothered them. Sasquatch is a little more formal than Bigfoot, but I know I've read reports where the witness said, I looked down at its feet and I realized where it got its namesake.
Very early on in our Free Range Texan podcast, we squared off face-to-face with the whole Bigfoot or Sasquatch phenomena. The thing that I began to notice right away is that there were believers and non-believers, and everybody falls into one end of that category or the other. But what I am noticing as the weeks, months, and years roll by is that there are more and more people that seem to be willing to say, well, yeah, they're probably there, but let's talk about something else. People are getting more used to the idea that there are creatures out there that we are yet to learn about.
The things that I've learned in 20 years of researching it, if that were public common knowledge, it would shock society if they knew exactly what was going on, who they are. I was fortunate to read a book about a year ago. It was one of the most in-depth interactions with a clan of them in Tennessee, and I believe we talked about this briefly last time I was on, but it's 50 Years with Bigfoot, Tennessee Chronicles of Coexistence, and to read that, and I could tell by what I was reading that this was true and it happened, and hoaxers can't make this stuff up. For those of us who have researched this long enough, if somebody who doesn't know the subject wants to try to put together a story, you're going to see through it real quickly because there are ins and outs of it that they don't know. And it's amazing because it seems like the public consciousness shifts as a whole. The Bigfoot name came into the public consciousness, exploded onto the scene in '67 with that Patterson-Gimlin film. And before that, when someone saw one, it was still startling, but even go back to the cowboy days. I went and researched reports from the 1800s, and in a newspaper, it wasn't uncommon to hear an account where it said a bunch of cowboys were out riding, doing whatever they're doing, and they came across this hairy man, this hairy beast that was quick on foot with no clothes and covered completely in hair from head to foot. They watched it. One of them took a pistol, shot at it. It left, did a somersault, and ran out of there quicker than a deer. The cowboys came back to town and promised to form a posse to go find this wild man of the woods. And this is how the attitudes were in the 1800s. So they didn't see it and think, oh, my gosh, this shouldn't exist. This isn't real. This is freaky. Where did it come from? Because they knew at that point in time they hadn't seen it all. Now, fast forward to 1967. You have the Patterson-Gimlin film, and something's put on film and shown before the public, and everybody's like, that's just a person in a costume. Well, the problem with that is when professional anthropologists look at that film and study the biomechanics of its locomotion, they realize a human can't walk like that. And so it becomes very inconvenient. But it also, as we talked about before, it's inconvenient for science and religion, and we've built our society based on a set of beliefs. And when I watch Ancient Aliens on the History Channel, one of my favorite shows, and my wife and I have gotten her to watch that a lot because she's strong in faith, goes to church, I do too. But we watch that show, and she goes, now that's something I can understand what they're saying. And there's a shift that is occurring, Mike, that is making it more acceptable, and I've actually entertained the idea that this might be a slow rollout to condition condition the public, not so much a Bigfoot, but the UFO thing. And there is a connection between the two. But sticking here to the subject of Bigfoot, it's easier now because more people are getting videos. You have the TV shows. There's more of a believability, but there will always be skeptics because of their position in society, their reputation, and what they have to lose.
Now, wait just a minute. You just mentioned that, and it was offhanded when you mentioned it, that there is a connection between UFO and Bigfoot. Explain what you meant by that.
Well, there have been many sightings of UFOs where Sasquatches have been seen nearby, and vice versa. And because the Sasquatch people are so highly psychic, and the aliens that have visited and continue to visit this planet are so highly psychic, they are like 2 million candle spotlights that start on either edge of a 10-acre forest. They can't help but to meet up because of their minds. They're aware of each other. I'm aware through books that I've read that they do some of the heavy lifting for the aliens. And in fact, here's the bombshell for you. I was fortunate enough to have a lady who is deceased now, but when she was alive, we talked about her on the last show, shamanic practitioner. She's an interspecies communicator. She does what I would love to do. We're all communicators. And as I told my wife last week, I'd give anything to sit down and talk with 5 alien races and some Sasquatches and talk, and everybody just talk about our lives, where we're from, what it's like where they're from, what their hopes are, what their dreams are. If we're communicators, why not take communication to its highest, most spiritual level and speak to other galactic neighbors instead of talking to each other on Earth about the left, the right, the what's going on. Everything we talk about in our society, is it that big a deal? What if these things came out of the woodwork into our reality, aliens and Sasquatches, and said we're all going to sit down? What would happen? You know what would happen. It would crumble, our society, because we're built on being told certain things. This connection is in this session that this lady was very respectful to allow me. I was not there.
Are we talking about Kiwane lapsivitis?
No,
did I say that right?
Not. You got really good on the last. Yes, it's Kiwane lapsaritis, and I can get to him in a minute. This was Kathleen Greavy Odom.
Oh, excuse me. Go ahead. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
When I did my podcast on Bigfoot, word got out that I treated the more abnormal aspects of Sasquatching with respect. And for those who have had bizarre encounters or who even communicate with them telepathically, I didn't refuse to put them on my show. I brought them on. I treated them as normally as I treated the bread and butter witnesses I had on my show. And word got out, and she was a person who was involved with the Sasquatch people but didn't want to deal with the Bigfoot community at large because they did not understand what she knew to be fact. And so I gained her trust. She came on my show, and I allowed her to speak about what she does. She spoke to them telepathically while alive, and in return, I said, would you mind if I asked them 5 questions? And that was her standard thing, that you could ask 5 questions. And so I wrote 5 questions. It gets emotional for me.
That's
because
fine.
It's such a deep spiritual connection that I have to them, and I'm as surprised by this as anybody. About to wrap up, because we started with the UFO Bigfoot connection. I asked about that, and they didn't want to go into that too much and said for now it is not for me to know. But I know Kathleen was on YouTube in an episode done by Christopher Munch, who was the director of the film Letters from the Big Man. She mentioned that there is a connection. They work together, and they work in the light. The light means the good place in your heart. Don't live in the dark. If you're bad, you live in the dark. If you're a good soul, you live in the light. It works like that. Now, I have quoted what the last question I asked was, is there anything you would like to say? And these are their words. not mine. We are happy he is talking to many hairless ones about us. We will teach him to be strong, to talk soft for us. We are with him every day. He is learning how to be with us again. We would like him to visit us in the trees. He knows where to go. He must come alone. He must be soft in his heart. Tell him, Okanye. He will understand in the soft place of his heart. Mike, they like the fact that I stand up in front of my people. I'm feeling their energy now. That's why you're hearing me the way you're hearing me. It's a deep emotional connection, as you can hear. It's not a negative energy. It's a positive, uplifting energy, but it's them happy. And I knew this would happen, but I didn't tell you before we went on because I knew it would happen and it would explain itself.
That's fine, Bill.
This isn't me being weak. This isn't me crying because I'm this or I'm that. This is me being touched spiritually by them while touting them. So that's the thing. There were some other questions. They're very smart. They asked if there's anything I could do to help them, and they said, we don't need your help, as you would say. That was one thing they said, that if they don't, there's a speech barrier between us and them to the extent that if there's a phrase we say that they don't understand, they'll repeat that phrase and say, well, we don't need your help, as you would say. So that's just one of the 5 answers. They also said things about me that I never revealed to Kathleen that were me spot on. They said I listen to myself too much. They said he talks to himself too much. He needs to listen more and talk less. It is me. That is me to a T. So I'm telling you, this stuff is legitimate. Kiwoni Lapsaritis wrote a book, and in that book, The Psychic Sasquatch, it talks about a family having their telephone lines bugged by the CIA because they were having communications with Sasquatches, and CIA got in on it. The government, they did, yes sirree, started harassing family members. Another lady in northern Wisconsin received telepathic communication from one who was gentle, saying, there's danger ahead, I'm going to take care of it. Later that night, she saw the lit cherry of a cigarette behind a barn on her property. She'd gone up to North Wisconsin for the month by herself, dropped off by her husband to get away from him and everything for 30 days like they did every summer, and he would come get her at the end of the run. Well, she heard this voice in her head, and she saw the cherry of a cigarette in the outline of a guy being pulled back by a second guy, 2 guys apparently about to try to rob her. And that's when the creature made his move, and she heard a scream and never saw the guys again. So I'm telling you, Kiwoni has a PhD. People in America are encountering these persons. They have names for themselves. They have names for us. People of every walk. I read a report just the other night of a lady, a professional lady, who said, I saw one. You can't imagine how this has changed my world because I'm a professional who's in charge of keeping, I forget how she said it. She's in charge of their public posture. I can't be telling people that I've seen this, but I have to report it. And so that's where, if you go to freerangetexan.net, the websites that I've given you, people can hear the Bigfoot speech that we'll talk about, the encounters with the military where there was DNA sequencing ran and it came up a mix of human, animal, and chlorophyll. The encounter with the military where a 10-foot-tall, a real fighting one, lopped off the head of an American soldier, and another soldier says, I will never forget that as long as I live. That encounter is also on the links that you'll have on your website. So that's, this is such an important topic. I could go the whole show, and I want to give you a chance to ask other questions, so I'm going to stop there. But what you heard with the tears is them pushing my emotional buttons. That's what they say they are for me every day. I can feel them anytime I choose.
Bill, there are some things that I'm noticing that are kind of a mixed message here. On one hand, I'm hearing you talk about a very sensitive creature and the fact that there is some benevolence to their messages that you receive from them. And on the other hand, we're talking about situations where a soldier gets his head lopped off. Basically, are Sasquatch creatures, are they really dangerous? How should we feel about them?
They can be dangerous, and if they are persons, as I believe they are, then there are going to be good ones and bad ones. And in that story of 50 years with Bigfoot, Chronicles of Tennessee that I mentioned earlier, there was the brother of the main Bigfoot in the story who was not a good one. He actually raped a 13-year-old girl, and the name was withheld. She had to be sent to a mental institution because he not only scrambled her brain, but he scrambled her insides when trying to rape her. And I'm not trying to be graphic. I'm not trying to be gross. I'm not trying to shock. I'm just telling you that persons, think of the human population, mostly good, but a few bad apples. And there are reports. Now, in this case with the military, it could have been a clash where the military's doing maneuvers. One came out and said, essentially, this is my home. What are you doing here? And the military, I mean, what do you do? It becomes a very dicey situation. They're not going to say, everybody stand down, go back, this is their home. What if one of them attacks one of the other? Either a party attacks the other. You have this skirmish on, and then you know it's going to be hushed up, just like UFO activity, is all because we've been fed a story of how things are supposed to be. So that's why this has to be covered up. You have to ask yourself, why do they cover it up? Why do they cover UFOs up? Well, the lid's off. The genie's out of the bottle. I don't know why in the world they ever thought they could hold this in.
It would now be a good time to bring up the name Dr. Matthew Johnson.
Yes, and he's got a story. He's got a story that goes into other dimensions, holes in the sky that open up, and he has done work that is unprecedented in anything I've ever experienced in my 20 years of research. And I choose to believe him. A lot of people are going to say that's a bunch of horse duty. I grew up in Big Spring, Texas. I grew up in the Methodist Church. To this day, I volunteer in the church twice a month, either reading scripture or playing my bass. I'm a good person. I have a good heart, but I have a very open mind, and I've never been afraid to explore the unknown. And what I want the skeptics to do is to quit saying this isn't real and actually do research. Because in my 20 years of research, I've not met one person who says, you know, Bill, I've researched this subject and I still don't buy into it. It's all a bunch of baloney. Do your research. Talk to somebody. Just look into it. It doesn't take long to figure out there's something to this, but people won't because it's a threat to their belief system. It's okay. Your soul is still going to be just fine. There's no need to worry. And that's where the fear comes in. Living in the light means living without fear. Now, I believe in God. I go to church. I will always believe in God. But there's more to this world than meets the eye. And I get frustrated with my Christian brothers and sisters who want to poo-poo this subject while having done no research into it. I want to say, come into the woods and walk with me and feel the love that I feel when I'm in here. How cool it is to get away from people, cell phones, traffic, congestion, arguing, online this, Republican that, Democrat this, corruption this, impeach that. I need a break from all that, and I'll take the Sasquatch people over the human people any day.
All right. Again, let me bring you back. Dr. Matthew Johnson, what's the stories there?
His first encounter was at the Oregon Caves Monument in Oregon. I forget the name of the town off the top of my head, but the Oregon Caves National Monument. He'd just gone in there, come out, and was taking a hike with his family when he saw one. At first, he just heard, "Ruh, ruh, ruh." He told the family, wait here. He goes up the trail. As I think I said last time, he's on the trail, and on one side it goes up the mountain, the other side goes down. He goes up to get a better look, and that's when he sees it. He says it's about 9 feet tall, and this thing took some steps, looked at him, but then it disappeared, and not behind a bush, a tree. It disappeared into thin air.
Like poof.
And as I've learned how they do that, because there are some reports where they do that, but mainstream investigators won't touch that paranormal aspect of it because it's such a challenge to our belief system. But as I had learned from Kathleen, who did those sessions with the Sasquatch people, it's about vibration, and that theirs is, as I understand it, higher than ours, and we see them because their vibration has slowed down. But they're able to go into other dimensions. Not all of them. Evidently, you are not born able to do that. You need to learn to do it. Dr. Johnson saw it disappear, and as I understand, they changed their vibration, and it doesn't mean they went somewhere else necessarily or to another dimension. It means that they're still in place, and they've just changed their vibration.
That is something that I wouldn't be anxious to run back and tell people about.
No, it would. Well, he didn't say it disappeared. Here's the catch. And by the way, there was another story right quick of a hunter who saw a deer hanging suspended midair, walking away from him dead, clearly dead, as if it was slung over something's shoulder, but he couldn't see what was carrying it, but he could see the weeds part as it walked. Now, what would you do if you saw that and you were a hunter? Seeing a deer slung over, think of a Bigfoot carrying a deer off. I bet you there's a hunter out there who knows a hunter who's either seen one or seen something that he won't dare talk about, and has changed his perceptive of the woods. What Dr. Johnson did not do at first when he came public was said it disappeared. He never said that, and I'll tell you what he did. At first, he only said he saw it. I saw him on TV with my own eyes. His lips were quivering, and he was crying. And the emotions that come forth, similar to what you felt with me earlier, it was many years after at a conference that Tom Powell, who wrote a book called The Locals about the Sasquatch people, approached him at a conference and said, "Matt, what really happened on that mountain?" And Matt said, "I'll tell you, but I have to tell my wife first because I've never told anybody." And here come those emotions again. I didn't see this coming. It's them. It's them. I know it is. He said, "Let me tell my wife, and I'll come back and tell you." And he said, "Tom, I saw it. I saw it take a few steps, and then it disappeared." He goes, I knew there was more than what you said, because Tom has been one of the few brave investigators to investigate that aspect of the Sasquatch phenomenon. This is what happens to people. Not every sighting involves disappearance. Not every. But there are cases where it's happened. But I'm trying to get back to the Dr. Johnson thing here. That's where he got the invisible, and only years later brought that out once he had established credibility about his story. And then he started going back up to the mountain where he had originally saw it, and things started happening. Because when they went back up to the mountain, as nightfall came, one of them looked over, and there was a rip in the sky. And I'm guessing 10, 12 feet off the ground, maybe 5 feet off the ground, some feet away from them, 30 feet or whatever, but a rip into another dimension. And the sky, if I remember correctly, was red. The vegetation was dark. And the reason that was the case is because this was a planet the Sasquatches originally came from, and it was circling a sun that was dying. And so they are stuck with the problem of how to get off this planet to another planet. And as I've learned in my UFO research, but wormholes, how to cut across space and time. Well, they opened up a doggone rip in the sky to another dimension. And one of the Sasquatches told him in mind speak, as Matt calls it, that you're the only human on Earth who's ever been able to do that. And get this, I know this is crazy. It still sounds hard to believe, but upwards of 22 to 24,000 Sasquatches were able to come off of that planet circling the dying star onto our planet. So now he didn't witness them coming through in files, with mile-long links or anything. He's got a book out on it. And you can put the link to that on your website. But he has a book chronicling his 50 years of research, culminating in this accidental, or was it, opening the sky and allowing another form of person to continue living. And for people who are religious and in church, I'm sorry this sounds crazy to you, but I'm church. I'm a church guy. I believe in God. I just see Matt as a helper. a professional psychologist who used his gifts to help another race of people. And at the end of the day, that's not a bad thing. How many humans here would do that for each other?
We want to tell our listeners, first of all, this has been mentioned a couple of times, but on our website at freerangetexan.net, when you land there, then you click on the blog, and there is now available for you a complete article about Bill and some pictures of Bill there. Bill, we also want to say that a lot of the things that you're mentioning and the websites and so on and so forth will be there on your blog article on freerangetexan.net. So if anybody wants to look a little further, they can certainly do that. But I wanted to stop right here for just a moment because we received this very day from you a recording, and we have several recordings of actual recorded Sasquatch sounds from different friends around the country, but we have never had one that is as clear and demonstrates a range of emotions. There are times in this deal where I feel like, well, this Sasquatch is upset, and then it goes a little further, and no, he's pleading, and then it goes a little further, and it almost sounds loving or caring, and then bam, he's upset again. And you begin to hear all of that in this, but we'd like to play that recording right now. Before we do, is there a quick backstory on this recording? Where did this come from?
This came from the Sierras in California. One Moorhead and his friends were doing their annual hunt high in the Sierras, and they would find footprints. They would get to their lean-to shelter where they would sleep way away from everybody, only to find the alders that comprised the roof of their shelter had been replaced from the previous season's alders, which would have been worn and weathered. And it's as if these creatures had watched them come up, and they would do them favors like that. And one night in camp, they got the surprise of their lives, and Al Berry, who was a local journalist who agreed to come along on the expedition as a media person to chronicle it, brought a tape recorder and got those amazing sounds. You hear a female, you hear the male, and you described it perfectly, the range of emotion. I loved your reaction to it, Mike, because I don't think you'd heard it before, and you can tell when you listen, you can tell what they're feeling, even if you don't know their language, just like you can tell when a Japanese person's ticked. You know, you can tell. It's authentic.
That's a good example. Yeah.
And it's been authenticated. You know, it's been authenticated by a linguist at the University of Wyoming, and it demonstrates a vocal tract that can go lower and higher. There you go. But that's a short
All right.
story.
Here we go. Let's play this for our listeners. That's a pretty remarkable recording, and I don't even... I have to listen to that a few more times to tell you the truth. I'm not certain if I heard that somewhere that I wouldn't grow a little bit concerned, even if they did put a new roof on my shelter. But, Bill, let me ask you this. A lot of people have asked me, and I have no answer for this, but if all these thousands of Sasquatch creatures are existing among us on our planet, where are their bones?
Well, they bury them. They bury their dead. There have been incidences, a book named Enoch.
Repeat the name of that book.
It's Enoch or Enoch, Enoch.
All right.
And in that, the main witness in the story tells of a grieving female Sasquatch burying a dead young one and digging a big, deep hole that was filled in with dirt, a tree planted over it, straw and everything put back over it. That's one account. Another one, a large boulder or series of boulders rolled over the body by other Sasquatches. In short, they bury their dead. Here's the thing. You're not going to just find Sasquatch bones walking around. In fact, Grover Krantz, the late retired anthropologist from Washington State University, asked over 25 years hikers, bikers, hunters if they'd ever seen the bones of a mountain lion or a black bear, and no one could ever say yes. They bury their dead. They don't leave easy clues to their existence. And unless you happen to be there when they bury one of the dead and are foolish enough to try to come back and get the bones, you're not going to get anything. You're not going to just walk upon it. They bury their dead. And so the soils, the acid in the soils, even once they're buried, the acid in the soils, the bugs, all those things will do their job.
Bill Lee, you are such an interesting person to talk to, and you share a viewpoint on the whole Sasquatch phenomena that I don't hear a lot of other places. And there are Sasquatch programs that you can watch and on television and on podcasts, but I don't hear people that go as deeply into the fact that Sasquatch are real and they are here. And there are some, for lack of a better term, beautiful communications that are going on when they choose to.
Yes, and that's what they say. When I read over all 5 questions that Kathleen allowed me to ask before we went on, and I remember some of the things that they said, and they are happy that I'm speaking to our people on their behalf. Let's see, they say, look in the place of your heart where I'm going to speak about this stuff, and I can handle that, and I believe they chose me to do this. I don't want to sound high and mighty, but lately I've given consideration to the fact that I think I might be one of those singled out for help in spreading the word, and it circles back as a professional communicator that this is what I yearn to do on a higher level than what I do during my day job, which I love as a voice actor, but there's a higher purpose for all of us, and I feel like I've tapped into mine.
Well, again, and if folks would like to communicate, send an email or so on and so forth to Bill Lee, if you will go to freerangetexan.net and then go to our blog, there will be a blog article there that will give you all of that information. Bill, we appreciate you. We love you, brother, for being on the program.
Hey,
and
pleasure.
Let me just tip off our listeners to another thing. As you know, always we end our Free Range Texan podcast with a trip to Michael Sean's campfire. I am elated about this campfire story that's coming up because I have done something that I have never done before. I have a special guest who is going to be giving our campfire story in the campfire story that's coming up just moments from now after this short break. And of course, that special guest is my friend, Bill Lee, and I think you will enjoy his campfire story. Bill, thanks a million. We'll see you on the other side. We appreciate you, brother, and look forward to having you back.
Thank you for having me, and to everybody out there, thank you for listening. Just please keep an open mind and do a little research. There's no threat there to your belief system. God loves us all. It's an amazing universe, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
You've been listening to another Free Range Texan Unexplained File. If you would like to get in touch possibly with today's guest, or would like to learn more information about this segment of our Free Range Texan Unexplained file, then go to our website at freerangetexan.net. You want to make a podcast? What if there was a place where it all could be simple? We got a team that comes alongside and listens to you. We know what you have to share is important, and we can make it easy. Go ahead, let A-Team PR share our polish and rich sound with you. Find out how smooth it can all be. So, you want to make a podcast from anywhere in the world? Go to freerangetexan.net and click on the A-Team PR banner and arrange to speak with one of our producers that specialize in making it all easy. Click on A-Team PR on freerangetexan.net. You should take some time for yourself with the best little podcast in Texas. Bring a friend and ride with the Free Range Texan podcast. Hi, this is Michael Sean. Our campfire program is a special one. I'm going to hand the reins to my good old friend Bill Lee.
The Bigfoot Stories, Bigfoot and the Colorado Fires. Ashley and her family vacationed in Pike National Forest every year. This year would be different for all the wrong reasons. Ashley was 5, and her brother Adam was 8. Her dad Nathan was a bank vice president, and Cheryl, his wife, was a nurse. Her training would come in handy on this trip in a way she would have never guessed. The lure of Pikes Peak and all that made Colorado beautiful gave them a Rocky Mountain high that was a welcomed relief from their busy lives. But fiery storm clouds were brewing, in the form of wildfires that were forcing thousands to flee Colorado Springs. The fires of 2012 would not soon be forgotten by Colorado residents. Roughly 24 square miles in size, dozens of homes would burn, and even the Air Force Academy was evacuated. Humans weren't the only ones seeking safer ground. Colorado's diverse wildlife would take a big hit as a result of the 2012 fires. That included the Sasquatch. A confluence of events would bring together a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, a normal American mom, a normal American dad, and a burned Bigfoot. Devil's Head Campground would serve as a backdrop for an encounter that would change lives forever. Arriving at Devil's Head, Ashley and her family began to set up camp, and the radio was the first thing turned on. Weather reports were especially important at this time, and although they were some distance from the fires, the latest weather and fire reports would prove to be the difference maker for the family, and, as it turned out, for one particular Bigfoot. Nighttime came, and as the family sat in chairs outside the cabin, the sounds of the forest kept them entertained and alert. One sound stood out from the rest. A long, moaning, wailing type of sound. It appeared to be about a mile away and was getting closer. Nathan, the father, stood up and walked a few steps away from the family so he could hear better. What he heard next got his undivided attention. The wailing sound was, by his best estimate, 70 yards and closing, slowly. He motioned for the family to get inside the cabin. The forest was quiet, and the footsteps of whatever was making the sound grew closer. Nathan took a few steps back toward the cabin, putting some space between him and whatever was coming near. Then it happened. A loud, long wail as the hair-covered creature, at least 7 feet tall, stepped out of the forest and into the pages of Nathan and his family's reality. The creature groaned, doubled over, and fell to the ground a scant 15 feet from Nathan. His family was watching from the cabin, all eyes as big as saucers. Cheryl, being a nurse, recognized it immediately. Second-degree burns over 60% of its body. It was obvious by the creature's condition that it was no threat to the family. Cheryl locked the kids inside and told them to stay completely still. She slowly went outside and stood next to Nathan. The look in the creature's eyes said it all. Help. Cheryl walked slowly to the truck and got the first aid kit. Being a nurse, she kept the family well prepared for just about any emergency, except a burned Bigfoot. Nathan slowly approached the creature, and that's when it dawned on him what it was. The legendary Bigfoot. He'd never given Bigfoot a second thought, but now he was 15 feet away from a living legend. Cheryl approached as well and looked into its eyes. She knew that it knew she was there to help. Nathan pulled back to give the creature some space. It worked. The creature rolled over, its massive feet a glaring reminder of why it got its name. Cheryl, her hands shaking badly, administered first aid to the creature. To be so close, so in control of something so like us, but yet so different than us, left her heart pounding. The creature groaned lightly, kind of a coo-type sound, and gently squeezed Cheryl's free arm. She looked at the creature directly in the eye. This brought a tear to her eye. Nathan looked on in disbelief. He looked back at the cabin, and the children were staring wide-eyed at everything that was going on. Cheryl was trained to treat humans, not Bigfoot, and how to administer medical help to a 7-foot-tall, 300, 400-pound Bigfoot was anybody's guess. Cheryl guessed right. Patches of skin showed all over the creature's body, and Cheryl tended to each one. 64 minutes had passed when she had done all she could do for the creature. Then Cheryl did something that surprised even Nathan. She prayed. She asked God to watch over this marvel of nature, to heal its wounds, and allow it to return to whatever life it was entitled to. It must have worked, for the second she stopped praying, the creature projected a sense of calm, of peace, of compassion. The burned Bigfoot slowly stood up, rising to 7 feet tall. He slowly made eye contact with each family member, and as he departed, he put his huge hands to his side, palms facing out, in a gesture that said, "Thank you." Before Nathan or Cheryl could take their next breath, the creature tilted his head back, looked up to the sky, roared. Then leapt out of sight, disappearing into the forest. Nathan and Cheryl looked at each other, unable to speak. What they had just witnessed over the last 78 minutes would change their lives forever. And it would also change the lives of their kids, for the better. The family grew closer as a result of this encounter, and when they vacationed in Colorado's beautiful backcountry, none of them would ever look at the mountains the same way. The wildfires of 2012 would leave an indelible mark on Colorado, but like the injured Bigfoot in our story, the state would recover, and families would return to the Rockies to camp, fish, hunt, and just get away from it all. And, if they're lucky, They'll be sitting around a campfire and maybe, just maybe, they'll get to witness something or someone that has lived through fires for thousands of years. Someone who just might tell others of its kind how helpful the humans were that day. And that's not a bad thing. This has been the Bigfoot Stories. I'm Bill Lee.
Thank you, Bill Lee. And thanks for being our very special guest on our Free Range Texan podcast and here at Michael Sean's Campfire. Adios, my friends. Well, that wraps up a very special Free Range Texan podcast. And like we mentioned earlier, when you get a chance, share our podcast with friends, won't you? Take 'em home, sweetie pie.
Thank y'all for listening to the Free Range Texan podcast, produced at A-Team PR Studios out yonder in West Texas, with our host, who's been voted the hardest working man in podcasting, Michael Sean. Feedback or submissions to our program can be submitted on our website, freerangetexan.net. That's freerangetexan.net. This is Sweetie Pie on behalf of Michael Sean and the crew here in Studio A, where we're all looking forward to spending time with you on our next bi-weekly episode of the Free Range Texan podcast. Y'all come back now, you hear?
An A-Team PR production. End transmission.